Great. Well, my name is Matthew Frost. I have been the leader of an organisation in the UK called Tier Fund for the last 6 years. And it's been a privilege, it's been an amazing journey. I've learned masses and I'm still learning lots. It's great to be here. I believe transformational development happens when INGOs, when our organisations, the ones represented in this room, are transformed. And that's very much the journey I want to share with you this morning. I think so much of what we heard Brian speak about yesterday was actually pointing at us. Actually, how do we reorganise, reprioritise, reimagine the role that we think we have as INGOs, as NGOs, to play as development NGOs. Now, really, Stephen's talk yesterday was a great setup, really, for me. He essentially said, I think pretty much the same, local churches are indispensable to transformational development. When I joined Tier Fund 6 years ago, I went and spent a lot of time listening to partners and to staff. And the one overwhelming thing I heard, which was a bit of news to me, was that from the perspective of our partners and staff, the local churches are essential to the work we were doing. And the reality is, if we're all passionate in this room about transformational development, which I think this is what this whole track is about, we have to be passionate about the role of the local church. Without the local church, there is no transformational development. Transformational development happens, as we've heard so many times in the last couple of days, it happens one life at a time in relationship, essentially. So local churches are essential, and I think Stephen laid that out very clearly yesterday. And because it's so central, we put it in our vision 5-6 years ago. Tier Fund's vision is to see 100,000 local congregations, local churches, transforming physically and spiritually the lives of 50 million people. And we deliberately did that. We put local churches in the vision statement. Because again, we felt local churches was transforming the communities. That dynamic is the vision we felt God was calling us to be part of. Not simply getting people out of poverty, but we're seeing local churches transform their communities. And really the last 5 years we've been on a journey of trying to figure out, okay, well we've got this vision, what does that mean for us now? And it's been really hard. I think my main message this morning for you is if you all want to do this, really partner well with the local church, it's difficult, it's hard work, but it's really worth it. It's really worth it. So there's 3 areas where we've been on a journey from to. We've been on a journey from delivering our programs to serving the local church. We've been on a journey from telling the story of our organisation and how wonderful we are, to telling the story of the local church. And we've been on a journey from strengthening our own organisational capacity to strengthening external networks and helping local churches get plugged in and linked in. And actually those are huge changes for us, huge changes in the way we think and work. So I'm just going to unpack each of those briefly. So firstly, serving the local church. I mean, this is a radical shift, really, because we are orientating ourselves now down to service. We have 5 values at Tier Fund, and our 5th value is servant-heartedness. So let me just give you some indication of the shifts in just 2 areas. The first is this huge shift we've had from a programmatic area. When I joined, we had lots of thematic areas. We had a sort of water program, a livelihoods program, an HIV program, and so on. And we've been through a huge shift to essentially saying that our core program now is CCMP. That means Church and Community Mobilisation Programs, where essentially we're funding our partners to draw us alongside local congregations to help mobilise them for integral mission or transformational development. And that is upends us completely, because essentially what we're saying is well, you tell us what you want to do, having been through a transformational process. You can't predict that. that actually challenges us because it's no longer a one-year time frame we're talking about. This typically takes 3-4 years if it's doing well. Completely different time horizon. That's a huge challenge to the way we work. Log frames, logical frameworks. How many of your organisation use logical frameworks? Hands up. Okay, quite well. That's encouraging. It's only fewer. It's less than I thought. But I reckon 70% of you. Logical frameworks. They have a place, but genuinely they are not very helpful when it comes to mobilising local churches. Because half the staff, half the fruit, you can't predict. Where does that fit in the framework? And it's challenging. New measures we need. We've had to reimagine all the measures of actually what are we actually hoping to see out there at the front line. It demands huge organisational agility. No longer is it about delivering our programmes. Actually, we're now trying to figure out, well, as local churches get mobilised, we're trying to think, okay, well, what do you now need? We've got to sort of become almost a service organisation, which requires enormous agility and responsiveness of tier fund to serve those emergent needs, as opposed to predefined needs. And also it's requiring us to go through a radically different approach to organisation where we're trying to push as much responsibility down to our frontline staff, because only then can they be empowered to respond to the demands of local churches. If every time a sort of a local church says, well, we want to do this, and it's not from a logical framework, and then it ends up going all the way up the organisation to me, and I say, yes, that's okay, but that's ridiculous, it doesn't work. So we're having to empower more in the organisation. It's a massive change from going through this whole process of church and community mobilisation. And this is one of the, essentially we're also ending up having to produce a lot of resources now, such as Umoja and other resources, really which are designed to equip and help local churches get mobilised. We're realising that one of the biggest critical issues in Umoja now is finding good facilitators to accompany churches, as opposed to a water expert or something else. So everything is changing. Enormous challenges for us. Secondly, downwards accountability. We want to now be accountable to those we're serving. We have to be in this world of service. So one of the things we've now done is we're now basically creating systems to be accountable to those we're serving. Not just accountable to the donor. Actually, the best way to be accountable to donors is to be brilliantly accountable to those you're serving. So what we're doing here, this is actually one of the things we did in Cambodia, an exercise where we, with 30 other agencies, across all of our partners, we did a mass survey on our performance, and we asked our partners in Cambodia, how are we doing? And we basically got a scorecard saying, well, how well do we do on financial support, capacity building support, other non-financial support, our administrative approaches on relationships, understanding and learning. And this generated enormous insight for us. Because basically the point was, we're trying to say, we're here to serve you, the partner. Now tell us, how are we doing in each of these areas? What can we do better? What can we learn? We want to listen to you and create transparency in our relationship with you so that we're learning. We ask them satisfaction. We say, compared to your other donors, we want some customer satisfaction. How are we doing? And they scored us across the board on a whole set of indicators. This was rich material for us to start a dialogue with them and saying, how can we improve our service to you? We asked ourselves, if we could only have 2 indicators at a corporate level of our performance, what would they be? And we ended up deciding as an executive team that we probably need one around income, but the other one would be a customer satisfaction report on how well we are serving our partners. Okay, so very, very different approach. So we are rolling this out. We'll be rolling this out next few years across all of our countries, all of our partners. Secondly, the second big shift from delivering our programs to serving the church is from telling our story to telling the story of the local church. Okay, again, a big shift. And there's 2 challenges. I mean, there's so many challenges to doing this well. But the first big challenge is we have to live this story as an organisation. It's no good to sort of, if we are passionate about local churches doing transformational development, are all our staff in local churches doing transformational development? Because if we're not, The question is, does our message, are we really, is there any integrity to what we're doing, authenticity? So we've been producing resources such as Inside Out and another thing called Discovery, which is really helping UK churches to do all of this as well. And again, we're trying to, just 2 weeks ago, I was standing in front of all my staff saying, look, can we all have a go at getting this into our local churches and equipping our own local churches to do transformational development? Okay, so it's actually, we're really challenging ourselves now as an organisation. We can't preach to our partners to do this, or even to local churches, if we're not doing our level best to do this ourselves. We need to transform our own organisation, become more and more the visible face of the invisible God in our own organisation, and only then can we expect to maybe say the same to our partners. But it's beyond that. It's also about gathering, communicating and learning from the evidence together. Brian spoke about this when he introduced. He said, we've got to get better at telling the story of the local church. And there's all sorts of ideas. A few years ago we published a report called In the Thick of It, about 4 years ago. Why the church, the local church, is an essential partner for sustainable development in the world's poorest communities. And this was our first attempt to try and advocate with anybody and everybody, churches, denominations, but also with governments, and also with our peer NGOs, about why the local church is essential to transformational development. But we also, with the last few years, I've been trying to go further with a bunch of friends. We're launching something called the Joint Learning Initiative into the role of the local faith communities. And really this is about getting much, much better evidence of what's going on locally with local faith communities, local churches. And so what we're trying to do is basically say that one of the biggest problems out there, we all know that local churches, when they do it well, they do an amazing job of transformation. There's nothing like it in terms of sustainability, holistic approach, reach, cost effectiveness. But the problem is that story is really badly told. We all tell it, generally when it's told, you either have these big statistics where WHO says, well, 50 to 70% of the frontline provision in the fight against HIV and AIDS is provided through local faith institutions. But the problem is, that's it. You try and get more detail, there is no more detail. It's just these big statistics. Or you hear anecdotes where we all tell stories. We've all got great stories, and of course those are important too. But most of what's going on is quite self-serving. It's serving our own organisations or often the story that we're telling to our own supporters. We have to move beyond that now. This is what Brian was calling for. We must tell the story of what local churches are doing, and we must tell it brilliantly, because we're not at the moment. So huge opportunity. Our role should be to tell that story amazingly to every constituent we possibly can. And what kind of things should we be saying? Well, so just as we think about this Joint Learning Initiative, which we're just trying to get off the ground now, this is an initiative that I'm taking forward with a number of big UN organisations, UNAIDS, UNFPA, World Bank's been a little bit involved, with some of the big faith communities, the Anglican Communion, other church networks, with some big faith-based organisations, research institutes, McKinsey, I've managed to get involved, so a number of different groups. And really the key principle is we have to do this together. It's a joint initiative. We have to learn together. Practitioners, academics come together, as opposed to a research institution going off on its own, doing some work and then coming back. Secondly, it's got to be focused on the local. So often we talk about the big denominational structures in delivery. We've got to focus on understanding the local. What's going on a local level. The third big thing we've got to do is really make sure we are looking at the good and the bad. So often we make a very self-serving thing. We're basically going out to show how wonderful the local church is, which of course is what we hope. But actually, in the process of doing that, we often hide the bad. But the point of this is creating transparency, so that we highlight the good and the bad, so that we can confront the bad, confront the prejudice, confront the bad practice, but also celebrate and replicate the good. It also must be robustly done, a robust evidence. And that's why we need to do, because this costs money, it needs thought, but this is where we need to do this together. We need to tell the story well together. The final area, in terms of the way we're seeing our role shift dramatically. So first is to serve the local church and program delivery. The third is telling our own stories, telling the story of the church and the local church and what it's doing. The third big change for us over the last 4 or 5 years has been the shift from strengthening our own organisational capacity alone, having much more of an orientation to strengthening networks, and especially plugging in local churches all around the world into the wider church networks, the wider network of resources and knowledge and information that's available. So just a few things we've been thinking about. This is just a snapshot of some of the things we've been working on. So firstly, there's a shift. We've been shifting from a hub and spoke model, where we see ourselves at the centre of a wheel, where we are sort of, our partners are coming to us and we're at the heart of this really, to actually we are just one node in a network. So that's the way we see ourselves now, a node in a network. We're always looking for other parts of this network that are already doing that we can bless. When I joined TIF, often it seemed like every time there was a good idea, we would go out and employ somebody. Every time there was a new need, we would assign an expert and do it in-house, as opposed to saying, well, where in the kingdom, where in the church is this already happening? Let's go out and find that person or that individual and bless that. So node in a network. We're focusing more and more on promoting transformational development. We're looking for other networks that we can work with. We're looking for other networks that we can bless and support. We have this thing that we're involved with called the Integral Mission Initiative. We're trying to encourage conversations to have in as many countries as possible at a national level to talk about transformational development, integral mission, whole life discipleship, at a church leadership level, so that we see in every country. The vision is to see that the sort of default theology is a holistic one in every country we work in. But we can't do that alone. We can only ever be a catalytic player, maybe a catalyst of something else that's going on. So promoting transformational development. What else? Sharing knowledge and learning. This has been one thing that TIFUN has done way before my time. Has always really kept is just sharing knowledge and spreading it everywhere and giving it away free. And the TIFUN International Learning Zone, TILS, there's a vast amount of data there that we've just given away. And we've always done that, and if anything I want to see us doing even more of that, sharing information. All of these things, the Emoja resource, so all these things we're deliberately trying not to badge heavily as tier funds because we want to give it away. Advocacy and campaigning, we heard about that earlier. Advocacy, when we come together and speak with one voice, our voice is so much more powerful. That's why advocacy is so important, but that again involves creating links, relationships, networks. We must, though, focus on majority world networks. I think that's been a bit of a blind spot over the last 20, 30 years. We often create networks up here in the north, in the minority world, but we must be focused, especially us, on blessing, linking, encouraging, serving majority world networks. And there's some really exciting things going on in terms of much deeper collaboration between organisations that some would regard as competitors. So Emoja was a collaboration, this resource kit on mobilising, helping churches mobilise themselves. That was a shared endeavour. It was the pooled wisdom of a bunch of organisations coming together. The Joint Learning Initiative is very nature joint in a collaboration. The Integral Alliance, some amazing opportunities with some organisations in this room where we're saying, well, how can we work together in a country? How can we share resource? How can we not duplicate? And also we're trying to now connect North, I know some of you in this room are doing this too, we're trying to create real meaningful relational links between minority world and majority world local churches. So there's so many areas that we're trying to help local churches get plugged in into the wider network. So really in closing, this is one of my favourite pictures of a local church in Malawi. And it just, for me, comes on everything about why TIFUN exists. It's just to serve this kind of local church all around the world, 100,000 of them. And really, all I want to close in saying is, if we are passionate about transformation, we must be passionate about local church. If we want to partner with a local church, it requires a radically different approach, because that's the journey we've been through. That was Brian's call yesterday morning. It is not tinkering, it is transformation. We're still on a journey. I don't claim we've got it right, but that's really been our lesson. Working with the local church is without question the right way, but it's also the hard way. And my last real message is, I think that's what the world most desperately needs us as Christian organisations to do right now. It is to work with the local church, and to do that, and to recognise and to reimagine and to transform ourselves. Because the secular development world is struggling. It doesn't really know what its big story is anymore. It doesn't really have an authentic story of hope. This is what my peer organisations secular organisations in the UK are telling me. It's questioning sustainability because it's always known that the key to sustainability is local empowerment, but it doesn't know how to do local empowerment. It knows that this narrow focus on physical goals and economic goals is not good enough. But it doesn't have a story to think about human flourishing, and it has no idea how to turn on all of that innate human capacity that comes when people rediscover a sense of hope, meaning and purpose in their lives. So many problems in the world, at the end of the day, in poverty terms, come down to how do you change a human heart. And I think we all know that only Jesus can do that. And the local church, therefore, is the answer to so many issues. And that's why we need to go out and tell the secular world, the whole world, about the incredible power of God at work through local churches around the world. And we must change ourselves to serve that vision. Thank you very much.